This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law in striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions to interfere with the normal functioning of the executive branch. The Supreme Court has stopped the presidency itself. That's what they've done. And really, it's been an amazing period of time this last hour. There are people elated all over the country. I've seen such happiness and spirit. Sometimes you don't see that, but this case is very important. I was elected on a historic mandate, but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively try to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for in record numbers. It was a grave threat to democracy, frankly, and instead of merely ruling on the immediate cases before them, these judges have attempted to dictate the law for the entire nation. In practice, this meant that if any one of the nearly 700 federal judges disagreed with the policy of a duly elected president of the United States, he or she could block that policy from going into effect or at least delay it for many years, tie it up in the court system. This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades, and we've been hit with more nationwide injunctions than were issued in the entire 20th century together. Think of it, more than the entire 20th century, me. I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for stepping in and solving this very, very big and complex problem, and they've made it very simple. I want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly, as well as Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. Great people. Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation. This was, in fact, it was the same date, the exact same date, the end of the Civil War. It was meant for the babies of slaves, and it's so clean and so obvious. But this lets us go there and finally win that case, because hundreds of thousands of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason. It was meant for the babies of slaves. So thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with these numerous policies and those that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including birthright citizenship, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people. We have so many of them. I have a whole list. I'm not going to bore you, and I'm going to have Pam get up and say a few words, but there's really, she can talk as long as she wants, because this is a very important decision. This is a decision that covers a tremendous amount of territory. But I want to just thank, again, the Supreme Court for this ruling. It's a giant. It's a giant. And they should be very proud, and our country should be very proud of the Supreme Court today. Thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship.
The president, enabled by the Supreme Court, is engaging in an unprecedented assault on Americans' constitutional rights. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, go on and on through the Constitution. They're now putting them all at issue.
The Trump administration celebrating major wins at the U.S. Supreme Court tonight. Let's get some analysis from White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Stephen, good evening. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Brett.
You know, the president said this is a big deal. You have said that this is a really big deal as far as the implication on some of these injunctions around the country.
It's monumental, Brett. This 6-3 ruling restores American democracy. So President Trump, over the last 5 months, had more nationwide injunctions issued against him than were issued in the 100 years of the 20th century. most of these nationwide injunctions have come from a small handful of very hard left district court judges in just 4 or 5 cities like Los Angeles, Boston, San Francisco, Chicago. No one in America consented to be ruled by a district court judge in Chicago or Manhattan or Los Angeles or San Francisco. They elected one American president to run the executive branch. Today, the Supreme Court has said President Trump is the one in charge of the executive branch. The Department of Defense, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security. That is how our democracy works. Every 4 years, we go to the polls and we elect a president. We do not elect a Marxist judge in a far left city to rule over us. And that's what the Supreme Court said today, Brett.
Yeah, as far as the nationwide injunctions, you can put up past presidents and all the injunctions in their time. We have a graphic of this, and you go back to President Obama, President Bush, they're at 6, 12. President Trump in the first term is at 64. President Biden at 22, 40 so far in the second term. Here's what the Senate Minority Leader said, Chuck Schumer. This ruling hands Donald Trump yet another green light in his crusade to unravel the foundations of American democracy. His plan to end birthright citizenship is blatantly unconstitutional, but instead of stopping in its tracks, the court has instead ducked the question and bowed to an out-of-control executive branch. Respond, if you will, to Chuck Schumer and the issue of birthright citizenship.
Yes, well, look, Chuck Schumer is cheering for district court tyranny. Chuck Schumer doesn't want to win a national election. Chuck Schumer wants to be able to install a single district court judge in a far left community to make decisions for the whole country. That is authoritarianism. That is fascism. That is not freedom. That is not American democracy. Let's talk about birthright citizenship. After the Civil War, Congress and America came together to ensure freedom for the children of slaves. Not the children of illegal aliens, the children of slaves. If you go to the UN today, the United Nations, you have diplomats from all over the world. None of their babies become automatic American citizens. Why? Because they're subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign country. Their allegiance is to a foreign country. Their citizenship is to a foreign country. Illegal aliens are no different, in fact worse, because illegal aliens are expressly forbidden from even being on our soil. Their allegiance is to a foreign land. They're under the jurisdiction of a foreign nation. Their children are not U.S. citizens, and the Supreme Court has now cleared the way for us to restore the actual meaning of the United States Constitution and the idea that this special privilege does not belong to illegal aliens and their children. I'll make one more point about democracy. Chuck Schumer and the Democrat Party presided over the invasion of this country, violating our immigration laws, violating our sovereignty, violating our Constitution. And now they're relying on a handful of district court judges to cement that invasion. Americans showed up at the polls in overwhelming numbers to repel that invasion, to put Donald Trump back in the White House. With today's action, the Supreme Court has said that President Trump can fully deliver on the mandate the American people gave him in November.
And we'll see in October how the Supreme Court deals with this in the big picture, specifically on the issue of birthright citizenship and where that goes. I just want to ask you one more thing about the tariffs. The president answered some questions about that, said there may be some other deals coming, but he may just write letters to a number of countries and say, this is what you're paying. Is that where he's leaning?
Well, yes. So as the president has said, the United States has the most coveted market on the face of the earth. Everybody wants to do business in America, especially now that President Trump is here. Everybody wants to sell their goods into America. We are the largest, most dominant, most lucrative market. That gives us leverage. That allows us to say to a foreign country, if you want access to our market, you have to pay a fee. That fee, in turn, what will it do? It will pay down our deficit. It will pay down our debt. It will allow us to lower taxes on Americans, as we are doing right now with the big, beautiful bill. In other words, part of the beauty of the tariffs is they are paying for the tax cuts in that legislation. Yeah, yes, there will be some deals with countries. The president made a historic deal with the United Kingdom that is a massive win for American farmers, ranchers, and agriculture. And I'm sure you will see more deals in the coming days. I will also note, as is now universally acknowledged, not only did the tariffs not create inflation, inflation is back down. Inflation has been defeated. So our economy is soaring, jobs are being created, American workers are going back to work, the labor force is growing again, inflation is gone, and our manufacturing jobs are coming back to the United States where they belong. So the tariff
All right,
strategy
last thing.
has been
What
a
about
huge
your
win.
thoughts? Your thoughts on the big, beautiful bill and whether Republicans are going to get the votes to make it happen. The Senate seems to be pushing it off. The House is in doubt depending on what the Senate does.
The president has been clear that he wants the Senate, the House, to stay in session, to work all the way up to July 4th, not to go home, not to go on vacation. As he said, if they need to lock themselves in a room to get this done. This bill, at its most fundamental level, delivers on the president's core campaign promises, the campaign promises that elected the House majority, that elected the Senate majority. What are those promises? The largest tax cut and reform in American history, including no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. It also includes the most aggressive, complete border security reform and package in American history. It includes American energy, it includes deregulation, and of course it also includes massive deficit reduction through the largest welfare reform in American history. So this is a series of unprecedented wins for the American people, codifying what the president campaigned on, and again, crucially, Brett, what ushered in these Republican majorities. So we expect them to stay, to keep working, to get this bill to the president's desk.
We'll see. We're watching and counting heads on Capitol Hill. Stephen Miller from the White House Lawn, thank you.
Thanks, my friend.
The President of the United States on a big victory day for him. The injunctions across 94 districts in this country, 35, the Attorney General said, 35 of those injunctions, of the 40 or so, are from 5 liberal-led judge districts. That's what she said. Setting this up, the president started with talking about the victory and what it means for his agenda, and then he welcomed his attorney general to the lectern inside the White House press briefing room. It has been about an hour, and we've been all over it. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-host Emily Compagno. Also joining us today, Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst. Tommy Lahren, Fox News contributor and host of Tommy Lahren is Fearless, oh yes she is, on Outkick and foxnews.com. David Webb, Fox News contributor as well. Emily, I'm going to come to you. This was wide-ranging, but we'll try to focus in on the big moment today because that's the one that affects the entire country almost immediately.
Right, the injunctions. And you and I were speaking offline about the importance of the merits and the substance of the underlying case. So I'll get to that in a second because they're intertwined. This was a momentous decision, and this reined in the judiciary sort of wild agenda-driven decisions that have had a nationwide impact, as we've been discussing, 40 nationwide injunctions on a whole host of cases, from DOJ to everything, immigration and more, and sends the message that one activist judge in a district court in one of 5 states can't actually have an impact reining in the executive power. So here the executive branch is reasserting their power, their authority, and I thought what President Trump said was so correct in response to a reporter's question, which is it brings back the Constitution. It puts back the power of the people back into their hands because it's restoring the executive branch's authority. And in terms of that underlying merits, as we talked about, it'll come up in October. But this is part of a dual strategy that the DOJ is exerting, right? That they're seeking, A, to rein in that judiciary power, right, executive control, but also to sort of redefine the 14th Amendment. Everything that people take as gospel, it stems from a case in 1898 about a birthright citizenship. And the DOJ is arguing that subject to the jurisdiction thereof actually does now exclude those whose parents are illegal immigrants. And that at the time, by the way, in 1898, there were already exclusions carved in. So the exclusion concept is certainly not new right now, but that will definitely, again, restrict the judiciary's definition and expand the executive's authority. And I think this goes back yet again to underscoring that the Supreme Court always rules on the side of the Constitution, the people, and the correct decision to the chagrin, perhaps, of a lot of these activist judges. And those arguing about agendas, it has nothing to do with that. This restores power to the people.
So real quickly, so that birthright citizenship ban on that or adjustment to the existing law, as you pointed out, Emily, That could come in October on the next session. That's what we heard from the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, when she took the lectern a little while ago. She said it will likely happen in October, but it could happen at any moment because we're still waiting for other decisions on this Friday, too. So, Tommy, just in terms of the victory for President Trump and what we just watched, your thoughts?
This isn't just a victory for President Trump. This is a victory for the American people for many election cycles to come, because what these activist judges were doing was effectively wasting President Trump's time, but really wasting the American people's time, because what this did is it delayed the people's mandate to the president and to all of those who are supposedly serving us. So now what this does is it means not only this president, but future presidents and Congress can now enact the will of the people. This is also huge for immigration and horrible for those who advocate for illegal immigration, because ICE and those who are, working so hard to bring back our national sovereignty, they were really handcuffed because of a lot of what these judges were doing. This is going to allow them to actually carry out their duties. We voted for mass deportations. We voted to make sure we never have an invasion like we saw for 4 years again. This is going to go a long way in that. This isn't just for President Trump. This is for future American presidents and the Americans who vote for that president.
Lisa, Fox has been reporting today some 680 district court judges in the United States. You've got, more than 40 of these injunctions coming from just 5 of those districts, those judges, 35 of those cases out of the 40 or so. What do you make of it?
Yeah, we started with what President Trump called a giant win and ended with it. In between, there's, everything covered, I think, during that press conference. But look, President Trump is not above the law, but he's also not below it either. And we also saw Speaker Johnson in April had mentioned that 67% of all nationwide injunctions in the past 100 years have been issued against President Trump, and 92% have come from Democrat-appointed judges. So that's what's happening here, right? Liberal judges have become the new face of the resistance, and Democrats have subscribed to the ends justify the means mentality when it comes to President Trump. Where stopping President Trump supersedes all else. The rule of law, it supersedes the will of the American people. It supersedes what is right versus wrong. And even just the past election alone, they tried kicking him off the ballot. They tried to jail him. They raided his home. He was almost assassinated. And so hopefully this restores some semblance of order where the president of the United States is allowed to be the president of the United States.
Right. We have about 20 seconds for this, and we'll get more on the other side of the break. But you're clear.
This started November of last year in an article in the Wall Street Journal. Elon and Vivek laid out that there would be lawsuits in cases that would likely win at the Supreme Court. That led us to today. All of this is a trail, and the credit that Pam Bondi gave to David Warrington and to the legal team, that's key. They're the ones, when you peel back the curtain, who are doing the job day to day, in and out.
Yeah, basically 24 hours a day.
I think the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law in striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions to interfere with the normal functioning of the executive branch. I want to just thank again the Supreme Court for this ruling. It's a giant, and they should be very proud, and our country should be very proud of the Supreme Court today.
Americans are finally getting what they voted for. No longer will we have rogue judges striking down President Trump's policies across the entire nation. No longer.
President Trump and his Justice Department celebrating the massive win handed down by the Supreme Court today, which frees President Trump's agenda from the restraints of nationwide injunctions imposed by federal judges. And with that, so begins a fun-filled Friday afternoon. Going to be jam-packed as well. I'm John Roberts in Washington, and hello to the lady from Boston again today.
That's right. I'm Molly Lyon. I get to be in New York City today. Sandra is off. This is America Reports. Great to be with you, John. The president said that his team will promptly file to push forward the 40 previous orders held back. But the fate of Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship remains unclear.
All right, let's start off this afternoon by bringing in John Yoo, a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and former law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. So first of all, let's start with nationwide injunctions by these district judges. Where are we on that after this ruling?
They're dead, 100% dead. The Supreme Court has said now definitively district judges, of which there are about 700 around the country in every major city, they can decide the cases before them. They can give remedies like injunctions to the parties in the courtroom. But what they can't do is impose it against the government throughout the entire country at once. Really, that's the Supreme Court's job. And so what the court has said is, yes, it's going to be possible now for the birthright citizenship order to be struck down in Boston, but still upheld in Texas, that it might still be possible for people to get passports in Boston who might not get them in Texas. But that's the job of the Supreme Court to resolve that conflict. It's not the job of any individual district trial judge to do. So this is a really big win for the presidency, not just Donald Trump, but the presidency, because what the court has also respected here is that the president is elected by the American people to carry out an agenda, and it's important and right for him to be able to pursue that throughout the country at once.
Amy Coney Barrett wrote the majority opinion, and I thought that this clause from it was really interesting. She wrote, quote, "We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We observe only this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary." Smack.
Oh, boy, I'm glad I'm not there right now. I'm sure they're going to be great friends afterwards, especially when they need each other for the 5th vote on one of their cases. But, you know, Justice Jackson's dissent, I have to say, I thought was a little over the top. She's basically saying this is the collapse of the rule of law. You're going to have, you know, irresponsible presidents defying the rule of law, doing what they want, and the courts, no one's going to stop them. I don't think that's quite right. This is, in the long run, as a legal issue, not that important. It's important as a political issue for the effect it has on the government, its ability to pursue law. But this is actually the judiciary restraining itself, saying we're only going to apply our powers to the cases before us. We're not here as the judiciary to run the whole government. And so who benefits from that? Presidents do. But presidents are democratically accountable and electable. The American people who are watching this show, listening to you, John, they should not think that the rule of law is collapsing all around them. It's not happening. Basically, things are going to function normally. This is just really a narrow legal issue about the power of individual trial judges. The Supreme Court's always there, and they're going to decide these questions in the end. And I think that's better than an individual trial judge.
I should point out, nobody's listening to me on this. They're listening to you.
No.
Let me come back to birthright citizenship. Here's what President Trump said about it a short time ago. Listen here.
Thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation.
So as you pointed out a moment ago, this could create a patchwork across the country, that it's birthright citizenship is allowed in Massachusetts, not allowed in the state of Florida, and then ultimately it would go back to the Supreme Court to resolve this on a nationwide basis.
That's right, John. That's why the people should be listening to you, because you got it 100% right. You get an A+.
It's only because they follow you.
I wish. No, that is exactly right, John. This birthright citizenship order that President Trump has issued will be the law in the parts of the country where the courts haven't enjoined it yet under this decision. But the Supreme Court, and in a weird way, this expands the power of the Supreme Court against the lower court judges, because now it means that the Supreme Court has to intervene faster, decide these questions quickly, and not just sit around in the courts below. I tend to think personally that President Trump's going to lose on the birthright citizenship order. He's actually said in previous public statements he's not sure whether it's going to survive. But what it means, at least, is that the policy of the country will be set by an elected president, and then it will be reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court, the 9 justices, not 600 trial judges.
I want to ask you quickly just about this other case that the Supreme Court decided on. That's the Montgomery County, Maryland school board. The Supreme Court said that it has to allow parents to opt out their children from lessons involving LGBTQ issues.
One way to think of this has been an incredible run of several years now, 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, where the rights of parents to protect their children have been upheld by the Supreme Court. And more, in a bigger perspective, the rights of religious minorities to freely exercise their religion free from government interference. So this is another example of this winning streak that religious minorities have, winning streak that parents have. There was another decision saying today that Texas could require age verification before people can access pornographic sites. Again, another victory for families and parents.
Novel concept, parental rights, isn't it? John, great to see you. Thanks for kicking us off today.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate it.
And Andy, let me just interrupt you for a moment here, because in my ear, the producer is saying that the Birthright citizenship case is the first one. We do not know the result yet, but that is coming. Shannon is looking at it now, Andy.
Yeah, you know, I have to make one overarching observation about this, Dana. When we were here last year doing all this, it felt much more consequential. Not to say that Supreme Court cases are anything other than consequential, but last year we had these cases that were on which the balance of the 2024 election seemed to rise and fall. And I'm kind of thankful to be back in an environment where the Supreme Court is doing what the Supreme Court does, and it doesn't feel like the democracy itself hinges on it.
And Jonathan, as we stand by and wait for Shannon Bream to update us on what the decision was, the way I understand it is SCOTUS isn't necessarily ruling on the constitutionality of birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment. They're going to be ruling on the ability for these lower district judges to issue these nationwide injunctions. So depending on what we hear today, we're still going to have question marks about birthright citizenship. Is that right?
That's right. And with the national injunctions or universal injunctions issue, the justices obviously were concerned. They have previously expressed their discontent with district courts issuing these orders. So there does seem to be a majority saying that this exceeded authority. The question is, how will they thread this needle? How will they limit the district courts
Jonathan, let me just interrupt you. I'm sorry for the interruption, but Shannon has some information for us. Let's go to you, Shannon Bream. You're there with that case?
Okay, yes. So this is at least a partial, if not a full, and we're reading this because there are several concurrences here, but it's written by Justice Barrett, which goes against the ruling that I just gave the guidance because she's one of the least junior justices, but she was assigned to write this opinion. And essentially what she says, some say that the universal injunctions give the judiciary a powerful tool to check the executive branch, but she says federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given to them. When a court concludes the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power, sounding very much like they are limiting these injunctions. We know here that they have granted at least partially the stay to these preliminary injunctions, but they say only to the extent that the injunctions are broader than necessary to provide complete relief to each plaintiff withstanding to sue. They say the lower courts have to move expeditiously with respect to each of these plaintiffs. It says the injunctions are also stayed to the extent that they prohibit executive agencies from developing and issuing public guidance about the executive plans to implement the executive order. If you remember, part of this executive order on birthright citizenship, the stay was that the agencies that would be responsible for actually implementing the change with birthright citizenship, those agencies couldn't even start making a plan. So that part of it is lifted as well. We do see that the dissent here comes from the three justices you expect. It looks like Justice Sotomayor filed the dissent. Kagan and Jackson joined that. Justice Jackson also filed a dissenting opinion, but there are a lot of concurrences here. Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, there are others. So we'll parse through this, but at its first blush, it looks like this is a win in putting a limit on these nationwide injunctions. We'll see how far those limits go as we dig back through this.
Got it. Want to bring Jonathan Turley back in. Shannon, thank you. So, Jonathan, it sounds like this is kind of what you were mentioning earlier. 6-3 decision granting a partial stay on these nationwide injunctions unless there's a broader impact. Kind of decipher that for us.
Well, I've only started to read the opinion, but what I've seen does look like a victory for the Trump administration. Justice Barrett is saying that the only way for justices to exercise this type of universal injunction in some of these cases is equitable relief. But she does not find evidence that that type of relief was granted to these judges. So they indicate that the administration is likely to prevail on this issue. All of that is going to be awfully good news for this administration. They have been really hit with these sort of Lilliputian attacks. There are all these individual district judges effectively freezing federal policy and programs across the country. So it does appear to be a victory. It may be a bit more nuanced, but so far it looks like a good day for the Trump administration.
Andy, a question for you. Again, here are my dumb questions. This is not on the merits of birthright citizenship, then, it looks like, but am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I think this really, we never get to the merits because of the injunction issue. And it seemed to me that what made this case very interesting to people at the beginning was the birthright citizenship question and the very important question of whether that's compelled by the 14th Amendment or not. As the case was litigated, it really became this other thing, which was about these nationwide injunctions, which, for the reasons that Jonathan just mentioned, are the thing that has plagued the Trump administration across the board in its second term.
Andy, Jonathan, stand by. I want to bring in Shannon Bream once again. Shannon, I understand you're getting more details on the dissent in this case. Fill us in.
Yeah. I always think it's helpful to turn there because you can get a sense of exactly what they're pushing back against with all these different concurrences. And what they said is, because remember, again, this comes to us in the vehicle of the birthright citizenship case. And the questions at oral arguments were, OK, what if district judges decide differently and they aren't able to give an order for the entire country? Would a child be born in New Mexico have a different right than one in New Jersey, depending on how those judges have ruled in different places? Justice Sotomayor, writing for the dissent, says the parents of children covered by what she's calling the citizenship order would be well advised to file promptly class action suits and to request temporary injunctive relief for the class pending class certification. And so she's saying, listen, if you're one of these parents who are worried about what's going to happen with the citizenship of your child, you should be out there filing so that there will not be this patchwork, that every district will have an opportunity to weigh in. But she also says, get these cases moving quickly. She says lower courts would be advised to act swiftly on these requests for relief and to adjudicate the cases as quickly as they can so as to enable this court's prompt review, saying we have not decided that birthright citizenship question. We want the lower courts to act quickly so there's not this patchwork, so it gets back here and they actually answer the question on substance. She goes on to say this: today the court abdicates its vital role in these efforts, saying with the stroke of a pen, the president has, quote, made a solemn mockery of our Constitution. She said, pointing at the president, and then she goes on to blame the court. Rather than stand firm, this court gives way. So clearly the dissent not in line with what has been decided by the majority of this court. Again, we'll continue to read through those concurrences as well.
Andy, here's a little bit from what Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote in the majority part. She said that federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. And then this is a sentence I really noted. She said, when a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. And that might just be where this all came down to, Andy.
Well, yeah, of course. What they're saying is that this practice of nationwide injunctions, which we went almost 200 years of American history without having a single one, involves a court not only making a decision that binds the parties before it, but making a decision for the whole nation under circumstances where the court is the non-political branch that doesn't answer to the people whose lives are affected by these rulings. And I think it's interesting what Shannon just told us about Justice Sotomayor's suggestion that you go to class actions. That would even that, I think, would be a victory for the Trump administration in the sense that class actions are much more rigorous and much more regulated than the idea of these district judges in a completely untethered way just making rulings that apply to the whole country.
So let's bring in now Republican West Virginia Attorney General John McCuskey, J.B. McCuskey, that is. He led an amicus brief with the Supreme Court in support of limiting these nationwide injunctions. Welcome to you. Good to have you on this show. You urged the Supreme Court to do exactly what they did today. This is going to have massive implications, really, all across the country. Talk about how you made the case to the court and what does this mean?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we should be talking about here is that it's really sad that the Supreme Court even had to decide this. The district courts knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew that they didn't have the power to do these things. And the other thing that's sad is, and I think the reason why you see such a full-throated back and forth between the majority and the non-majority is that I think the majority knows that if this was a conservative case, right, if we had had a conservative judge who issued a nationwide injunction, this would have been a 9-0 case. And that's sad. But it's so obvious that district court judges only have the authority to rule on issues that involve the people that are before them. And nationwide injunctions go so far afield of that they really endanger, in my opinion, the very public perception of the court. Our courts are supposed to be above the political fray. And these nationwide injunctions put our district courts in the exact same place as Congress. And that is not a healthy thing for our democracy. And I'm just really happy that the Supreme Court has found some semblance of normalcy here, and we're returning our federal courts back to their constitutional roles, which is the district courts issue opinions for the parties in front of them.
So, JB, there are a number of other injunctions underway right now, I believe about 40 against the Trump administration. What now happens to all of those?
So all of those will head back to the district court, and they will issue rulings based on the parties that are in front of them. And their rulings cannot go beyond the scope of where their courthouse grasp ends. And so what will happen is then the normal course of action. We will have a case in the district court. If there are circuits that disagree, then there will be multiple cases in our circuit courts, and then the Supreme Court will get to make decisions based on legal issues where the courts around the country are disagreeing. That gives the Supreme Court so much more information and ability to issue good rulings when they're not having to be hurried as they were today.
So the dissent here, no surprise, very, very fiery language coming from Justice Sotomayor. We just heard a little bit of that from Shannon's report, but the left is also dissenting here. This is a legal expert, a legal correspondent on MSNBC Today reacting to the ruling. Let's listen to this.
What you have is a majority sort of acting like Congress here, abdicating its role as a co-equal branch, and instead, as one lawyer put it to me in a text, acting like a robed bystander to the serious deprivation of what we've long assumed for 128 years is a fundamental constitutional right.
Yeah, and then Justice Sotomayor basically said this was making a solemn mockery of our Constitution. How would you react to all of that?
That is unbelievably incorrect. It is kind of humorous to listen to somebody talk about how our constitutional republic is going to fall because the Supreme Court returned our district courts back to their constitutional role. We have a set of rules that our founders put together, and district courts simply cannot issue nationwide injunctions. And this is not a partisan problem in my mind. This is something that needed to be ceased. We've seen an uptick to the tune of over 90% of all of the nationwide injunctions have been issued in the last 15 years, 90%. And so what we're seeing now is the Supreme Court taking back the reins and saying, we get to make the decisions for the entire country, which is what the framers intended.
You were part of this religious liberty case as well, which was another big win for the Trump administration and for parents all across the country that want more control over what their kids learn at school. How far-reaching is this one, and what did you make of this?
Yeah, this is a huge case, too. And we filed this with my friend Jason Mieres in Virginia, who's a wonderful colleague in the Republican Attorney General's Association with me. And this case just gets back to the idea that parents have to be able to parent their children. The government is not your child's parent. You are. And you get to decide what are the messages that your children are going to be receiving in their public schools. It's simple. It's common sense. And I think what we're seeing throughout the Trump administration and these huge wins today is this return to this idea of common sense, right? Parents should have control over what their children are seeing in school. And that just makes sense.
Okay. Attorney General McCuskey from West Virginia, thanks for joining us. You had a big part of what happened today. A big win for you, a big win for the Trump administration. We appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Pavlich, along with Kennedy, Jessica Tarlov, Jesse Waters, and Brian Kilmeade. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. The Supreme Court laying the smackdown on rogue judges who think they know better than the 77 million Americans who voted for President Trump's agenda. The top court with a 6-3 decision that limits the use of nationwide injunctions. As you can see from this graphic, Trump is the MVP compared to other presidents when it comes to nationwide injunctions. 47 taking a victory lap in the briefing room and listing all the things he's now free to implement.
This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades. We can now promptly file to proceed with these numerous policies and those that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including birthright citizenship, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people. We have so many of them. I have a whole list.
But naturally, the liberal media and Democrats are melting down over the loss of their favorite tool to stop the Trump agenda.
This sounds like a giant win for the Trump administration and could likely trigger chaos now across the country.
There are two things that are resulting from this: chaos and confusion.
Reckless and unprecedented.
They have dealt a death blow to the rule of law.
Presidency is far more powerful than it was at 9:55 a.m. this morning.
And another key decision, the Supreme Court also ruling in favor of religious parents of different faith backgrounds who wanted to opt their children out of reading storybooks that go against their beliefs. President Trump hailing that as a major victory for parents.
It's a great ruling for parents. It's really a ruling for parents. They lost control of the schools. They lost control of their child. And this is a tremendous victory for parents. And I'm not surprised by it, but I am surprised that it went this far. It took us to bring life back to normal. So it's wonderful. It's parental. And I kept saying, we will give you back your parental rights. They were taken away, and this is a tremendous victory for parents.
All right, Jesse, chaos breaking out everywhere, according to the left, because of these rulings.
The Trump resistance is officially dead. This was the only thing that was slowing this down. It's no doubt a major body blow. All they have left are riots. The lawfare failed. These injunction maniacs failed. Weaponization failed. You can't be the party of lawyers. That's all they are. They're the party of lawyers. They're just going to have to start persuading people and legislating, what they're supposed to be doing. And they also, when they lose cases like this, they lose the moral high ground because their entire message has been this: that Donald Trump's a tyrant and he's trampling on the Constitution and he's destroying everyone's rights and he's breaking the law. But it turns out when these rulings come down, it's the left that are breaking the law as they oppose Donald Trump. So this clears the way for all the goodies that Donald Trump just listed. I'm mostly enjoying Amy Coney Barrett just bench slap Justice Jackson. In their brilliantly academic way, they're all calling her a nitwit. And we knew she was a nitwit because she couldn't define what a woman was. But they're basically saying you're not, in your dissents, grounding any of your arguments in case law. You're just making stuff up. And every other justice agrees that this woman is just not qualified. And you look back at the Biden legacy, he gave us Kamala Harris and he gave us Justice Jackson. And you got to look and say, wow, what a bad move.
And Kennedy, not only are they just making things up and not basing it on case law, they're also being hypocritical because Elena Kagan, who's a justice who didn't like this ruling, 2 years ago said you can't have a single district court judge stopping the agenda of a duly elected president across the country.
Yeah, and I wish it were a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court. And I don't like seeing these decisions fall along ideological lines because oftentimes, and it was, I believe it was Associate Justice Sotomayor who pointed out, they should be really careful because when there is a leftist president, he will issue an executive order on guns. That's actually something that kind of terrifies me. And I think they made a point about being very careful of executive orders trying to undo aspects of the Constitution when this president and other Republicans always run on originalism and adhering to the text of the Constitution as it was written, not as they interpret it now very subjectively. That's something that President Obama liked to do. That's something that Democrats are a little more fond of. And I think conservatives have to be very, very careful about that, because if this is the precedent that is set, then they'll just take every other aspect they don't like. You know, that Third Amendment, quartering soldiers. Watch out.
They're going to all be in your house.
You have some Navy fellas at your house here pretty soon, Jesse.
You have a very big grocery bill. You have a very big grocery bill. But Brian, a lot of the strategy from the Trump administration with these executive orders is to push these issues like birthright citizenship to the Supreme Court and to actually get some clarification on things like the 14th Amendment, for example. And as the president said today during his press briefing, he really feels like they can now move forward with his agenda that's been so impeded by these nationwide injunctions for the first 5 months of his second term.
And don't you think, Katie, they do have to go and start doing something, pass legislation?
Yeah.
Besides the president, when they get
Congress
done with the
should
big,
get
beautiful
involved,
bill,
too.
they should really actually do something. I thought it was interesting that out of the 64 injunctions that he's got in the first term, now 45 in the next, 92% were Democratic-appointed judges. So we're just cutting on ideological lines. Here's the thing. They could have done something almost as effective and said, can you stop picking the jurisdictions to bring the cases in and maybe make it a little bit more interesting? So if it's a Democratic judge, you bring your case to a city that will be sympathetic to your cause, and you stop the president in his tracks. I'm going to see it's going to be interesting because they're going to sign some more executive orders. They're going to give it to a district judge. That district judge, even though he hates Trump, will have to say, wait a second, the Supreme Court made a ruling, or is he going to say, I'm stopping it right here. I'll let this whole thing play out. So maybe it's still going to be delayed. Lastly, Amy Coney Barrett, who was called out by the president a short time ago by saying basically I picked the wrong person, she went after, as you mentioned, Jesse, went after Ketanji Brown. We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. And she goes on to say when judges issue injunctions to block policies like those the Trump administration is trying to implement, they can't apply the injunction to more than the parties involved. But Barrett said the type of order often is called nationwide injunction is judicial overreach. Yeah. Just pointing out the problem with her reasoning. So we'll see where this goes. I cannot wait for birthright citizenship September to come front and center. Because if you argue this out, from almost every level, it's being abused. Democrats should also not want to see it be abused.
Well, the fact that the majority opinion had that line in there from Amy Coney Barrett, then they all didn't take it out, it says a lot about the way they're feeling about their fellow justice. But Jessica, politically, where do Democrats go from here? I mean, a lot of their strategy was to use the court system to get these injunctions, and now that tool has been taken away from them.
Well, it hasn't been taken away from them because we're already back in court and federal court in Maryland, and the plaintiffs there had their suit ready to go. They knew exactly what was going to happen, and actually the majority opinion cleared the way for people to do this as class action. It won't have the same name, it won't be nationwide injunction, but it'll have the same ramifications. So Democrats, the party of lawyers, ready to go, suited up, sent up the bat signal. At best, this is a compromise position. So we should be clear that the executive order, the protection for specific plaintiffs stays in place. So it's not like they're waking up tomorrow and they're going to get kicked out of the country. And again, then we have this class action approach. To the idea that it is Democrats that only use that, it's blatantly false. The reason that we don't have student debt forgiveness from President Biden is because the Republicans went and got a nationwide injunction. People like AG Ken Paxton in Texas, there's a judge in East Texas that he likes a lot that puts out injunctions for the entire nation, super right-wing guy. So let's not make this about partisan politics.
So it's good they clarified that it shouldn't be used for either party.
Well, what's good, I guess, is that they clarified that if you want to go and do this to protect people and give them their constitutional rights, and the 14th Amendment is pretty clear, that you do it as a class action suit, not an injunction in this way. But, you know, Trump, he takes a victory lap on absolutely everything that he does. It was to be expected. He loves the podium, spent an hour up there. But if you look at the example that's already being set, like I said, in Maryland, you're going to see this happening all over the country for every issue that he listed off, every 64 of them. I don't know about, you know, the love violence.
It would be just that case.
But
For
they
example,
can do
just the Maryland case, it won't be a precedent for the whole country.
Right, but the class, the way that I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm very literate, is that that you don't have to have signatories. It can be an entire class of people. Obviously, it doesn't have to be everyone's name on it. So if they get a protection for a certain group of people, then that would be able to be quote unquote universal. So you will end up with universal injunctions. It will just go through the class action route.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch these big issues get to the Supreme Court, especially birthright citizenship in October. So we'll be watching.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.